The dust kicked up around her worn boots as she stepped off the stagecoach in Abilene, Kansas, and Maria Delgado knew immediately that coming here had been a mistake. It was the summer of 1872, and the cattle town buzzed with drovers, gamblers, and women whose painted faces promised things her mama would have crossed herself against. Maria clutched her small carpetbag tighter, feeling the weight of every stare that landed on her sun-bronzed skin, darker than most folks in these parts seemed comfortable with. She had come from Santa Fe with her aunt's address folded carefully in her pocket, a promise of work at a boarding house, and a fresh start after her parents had died from fever the previous winter. At 19 years old, Maria had nothing left in New Mexico except memories and a few distant cousins who looked at her like she was a burden they could not afford to carry. Her Aunt Rosa had written that Abilene was booming, that a hard-working girl could make something of herself here. What her aunt had failed to mention was how a girl with Mexican blood and skin the color of desert clay might be received in a town where cattle money flowed like whiskey and prejudice ran just as freely. The boarding house stood at the edge of the respectable part of town, a two-story wooden structure that had seen better days. Maria knocked on the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. When a woman finally answered, she was thin and severe, with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that looked Maria up and down with barely concealed distaste. "You Maria?" the woman asked, her voice flat. "Yes, ma'am. Are you my Aunt Rosa?" "I am." Rosa did not move to embrace her or even smile. "You are darker than I expected." The words landed like a slap, but Maria had learned long ago to swallow such blows. "Yes, ma'am, I favor my father." Rosa sighed and stepped aside. "Well, come in then. We have much work to do, and I will not have you standing on my porch drawing attention." The days that followed were harder than any Maria had known. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly cowboys and ranch hands who paid by the week for a bed and 2 meals a day. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, hauled water until her shoulders burned, and washed linens until her hands were raw and cracked. Through it all, Rosa watched her with those cold, critical eyes, finding fault in everything Maria did. But worse than Rosa's harshness were the comments from the boarders. Some ignored her completely, as if she were invisible. Others made remarks just loud enough for her to hear about "that dark girl," or asked Rosa if she was sure it was safe to have her kind handling their food. Maria kept her head down and her mouth shut, remembering what her mother had taught her about dignity and perseverance. It was on a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks after her arrival, that Maria first saw him. She had been sent to the general store to purchase flour and sugar, walking quickly with her shawl pulled up despite the heat, trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. She was examining the coins Rosa had given her, making sure she had counted correctly, when a commotion outside drew her attention. Through the window, she saw a cowboy struggling with a spooked horse. The animal was magnificent, a paint horse with a coat of white and brown patches, but something had frightened it, and it was rearing and pulling against the hitching post. The cowboy trying to calm it was tall and lean, with sun-lightened brown hair that fell past his collar and a face that looked like it had been carved from determination and stubbornness in equal measure. "Easy now, Dakota," he said, his voice low and steady. "Easy, girl. Nothing here is going to hurt you." Maria watched as he approached the horse slowly, not grabbing for the reins but letting the animal see him, smell him, understand that he meant no harm. His movements were patient, confident, and there was something in the way he spoke to the frightened creature that made Maria's chest feel tight. He treated that horse like it mattered, like its fear was valid and deserved respect. Finally, Dakota calmed, lowering her head and allowing the cowboy to stroke her neck. He pressed his forehead against the horse's muzzle for a moment, and Maria saw his shoulders relax. Then he turned, and his eyes met hers through the window. They were blue, she noticed. Not the pale, washed-out blue of winter sky, but the deep blue of twilight settling over the prairie. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Maria realized she was staring and quickly looked away, her face burning with embarrassment. She hurried to make her purchases and left the store as quickly as she could, not daring to look in his direction again. But she thought about him that night as she lay in the small, stuffy room Rosa had given her in the attic. She thought about the gentleness in his hands and the patience in his voice. She thought about the way he had looked at her, not with disgust or dismissal, but with simple curiosity, as if she were a person worth noticing. She told herself to forget it. Men like that, white cowboys with kind eyes, were not for girls like her. Her skin was too dark, her blood not pure enough, her place in this world too uncertain. Better to focus on her work, save what little money Rosa grudgingly paid her, and perhaps one day move somewhere else, somewhere she might be more welcome. But fate, it seemed, had different plans. The following Tuesday, Rosa informed Maria that she would be serving supper that evening. Usually, Maria worked in the kitchen while Rosa handled the dining room, but Rosa claimed her back was troubling her, and she needed Maria to carry the heavy trays. Maria suspected the real reason was that Rosa wanted to test her, to see if she could manage the boarders' scrutiny and comments without causing a scene. Maria pinned her long black hair into a neat bun, put on her cleanest dress, a simple brown cotton that had belonged to her mother, and prepared herself for an uncomfortable evening. The dining room was crowded with the usual assortment of ranch hands and drifters, their conversations loud and rough. She moved between the tables with her eyes lowered, setting down plates of beef stew and fresh bread, refilling coffee cups, trying to be efficient and invisible. "Hey, Rosa," one of the men called out, a burly drover with a red face and whiskey on his breath. "Since when you hiring Mexican girls? She is my niece," Rosa said stiffly from her position by the kitchen door. "She is here to help with the work. Awful dark, is not she?" Another man chimed in. "You sure she is really family?" Maria's face burned, but she kept moving, kept working, pretending she had not heard. She had learned this skill well in the past 2 weeks. "I would watch my silver if I were you boys," the first man said with a laugh. "You know how they are." Maria's hands trembled as she poured coffee, but she forced them steady. "Just finish the work," she told herself. "Just get through this meal. That is enough." The voice was quiet but firm, and it cut through the raucous conversation like a knife. Maria looked up and felt her breath catch. It was him, the cowboy from the general store. He sat at a corner table she had not yet reached, and he was looking directly at the men who had been taunting her. "What is it to you, stranger?" the burly drover asked, his tone turning aggressive. "It is common decency," the cowboy said, standing up. He was taller than Maria had realized, and there was something in his posture that suggested he knew how to handle himself if things turned ugly. "The lady is working hard to feed you, and you are repaying her with disrespect. I was raised better than that, and I expect you were too." The room had gone quiet. Maria stood frozen, the coffee pot still in her hand, not sure whether this was about to make everything better or infinitely worse. The drover looked like he wanted to argue, but something in the cowboy's steady gaze made him think better of it. He muttered something under his breath and turned back to his meal. The other men followed suit, and gradually conversation resumed, though more subdued than before. Maria forced herself to move to finish her rounds. When she finally reached the cowboy's table, her hands were shaking so badly that coffee sloshed over the rim of the cup as she poured. "I am sorry," she whispered, grabbing a cloth to wipe up the spill. "No need to apologize," he said gently. "Are you all right?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. Up close, she could see that his face was weathered by sun and wind, that there were small lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He looked to be in his mid-20s, maybe 25 or 26. There was a kindness in his expression that made her want to cry, though she could not have said exactly why. "My name is James," he said. "James Crawford. I just signed on with the Double R Ranch south of town. I reckon I will be taking meals here pretty regular-like." "Maria," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Maria Delgado." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Maria Delgado." He said her name carefully, pronouncing it the way it was meant to be pronounced, with the soft sounds of Spanish rather than the harsh anglicization most people used. "I hope those men did not upset you too badly." "I am used to it," she said, and immediately wished she had not. It sounded pathetic, defeated. Something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been anger or sadness or both. "You should not have to be." Before she could respond, Rosa called sharply from the kitchen, and Maria hurried away, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. James Crawford became a regular presence at the boarding house after that night. He was quiet and polite, always thanking Maria when she served his meals, always treating her with a courtesy that stood in stark contrast to the behavior of the other boarders. Sometimes she caught him watching her, and when their eyes met, he would smile, a small, private smile that made her stomach flutter. She tried not to let herself hope. She tried not to imagine that his kindness meant anything more than simple decency. But as the weeks passed and summer deepened into August, she found herself looking forward to mealtimes, to those brief moments when she could be near him, when she could hear his voice and see that smile. One evening, as she was clearing away the supper dishes, James stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Miss Maria," he said, his voice low enough that the other men would not hear. "I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to talk. Outside, perhaps?" Maria's heart leapt into her throat. She glanced toward the kitchen, where Rosa was scrubbing pots with vigorous, angry movements. "I still have work to finish. After then, I could wait." She should say no. She knew she should say no. Nothing good could come from being seen talking with a white cowboy, from giving people more reason to gossip and judge. But when she looked into those blue eyes, she found herself nodding. "There is a bench behind the house," she said quietly, "by the vegetable garden. I will be there in about an hour." His face lit up with a smile that made her knees weak. "I will be there." Maria worked faster than she ever had, scrubbing dishes and wiping down tables with such efficiency that even Rosa looked surprised. When she finally escaped out the back door into the warm evening air, she found James waiting exactly where she had said, his hat in his hands, his expression nervous. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing as she approached. "I was not sure you would." "I should not be here," Maria said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the heat. "If my aunt sees us or if anyone talks, I will lose my position. I will not let that happen." He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. "I just wanted to talk to you properly. I feel like every time we speak inside, you are looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone to say something cruel." He was right, of course. Maria sat down on the bench and James settled beside her, careful to leave a respectable distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The evening air was full of cricket song and the distant sounds of town, saloon music and laughter and the occasional bark of a dog. "Why are you being kind to me?" Maria asked finally, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "You could eat your meals in peace if you just ignored me like everyone else does." James was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. "My mother was from Ireland," he said finally. "She came to America when she was 16, running from the potato famine with nothing but the clothes on her back. When she first arrived in Boston, people treated her like she was less than human. Called her names, said the Irish were all drunks and thieves, told her she would never be good enough for America. She worked as a housemaid for a family that treated her like dirt until my father met her." He paused, looking out into the gathering darkness. "My father was a ranch hand, poor as church mice, but he saw past what everyone else saw. He saw a strong, intelligent, beautiful woman who deserved respect and love. They married despite everyone telling them it was a mistake, and they moved west to Kansas to start over. They had 20 good years together before fever took them both when I was 22. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. I am sorry. The point is, James continued, turning to look at her, I know what it is like to watch someone you love be treated as less than they are because of where they come from or what they look like. And I swore to myself that I would never stand by and let it happen if I could do something to stop it. That is why I spoke up that night. That is why I am kind to you, though kindness should not be remarkable, it should be ordinary. But I am just a servant, Maria said, her voice breaking slightly. I am just a poor Mexican girl with no family and no prospects. Why do you care? James set his hat down on the bench and shifted slightly closer, though still maintaining propriety. Because in the 3 weeks I have been eating in that dining room, I have watched you work harder than anyone else. I have seen you keep your dignity when men tried to strip it from you. I have seen the way you are gentle with the stray cats that come around the kitchen, even though your aunt chases them away. I have seen you smile on the rare occasions when you think no one is watching, and it is the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. He paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I care because I cannot seem to stop myself from caring. Maria could not breathe, could not think, could not process what she was hearing. You do not even know me. Then let me know you, James said simply. Let me spend time with you, talk with you, learn who you are. I am not asking for anything improper, Miss Maria. I just want the chance to know you. People will talk, she whispered, but even as she said it, she could feel her resolve weakening. Let them talk. There was a fierceness in his voice now. I have been on my own since my parents died, Maria. I have drifted from ranch to ranch, town to town, never staying anywhere long because nowhere felt like home. But something happened when I saw you that first day through the store window. Something shifted. And I think maybe I have been looking for you without even knowing it. A tear slipped down Maria's cheek, and before she could wipe it away, James reached out and gently caught it with his thumb. The touch was feather-light, respectful, but it sent electricity racing through her entire body. Why are you crying? He asked softly. Because no one has ever spoken to me the way you do, she said, her voice shaking. Because I want to believe you, but I am afraid. Because I have learned not to hope for things that seem impossible. What if I told you I am afraid too? James said. What if I told you that my heart has been pounding ever since you walked out that door, that I have been trying to work up the courage to say these things for weeks, that I lie awake at night thinking about you and wondering if I am crazy? Maria looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth of his words written in his face. He was afraid, he was hoping, he was taking a risk just as big as hers. I would like to know you, she said quietly. I would like that very much. The smile that spread across James's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. Tomorrow is Sunday. I do not have to work. Would you take a walk with me? Maybe down by the creek. I promise to have you back in time for whatever your aunt needs. Yes, Maria said, and it felt like stepping off a cliff and finding she could fly. Yes, I will. They talked until the stars were bright in the sky, until Rosa's sharp voice calling for Maria made them both jump. James stood immediately, ever respectful, and helped Maria to her feet. Until tomorrow, he said, and the promise in those words warmed her all the way through. That night, as Maria lay in her attic room, she allowed herself to hope for the first time since arriving in Abilene. She allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to have someone like James Crawford in her life, someone who saw her not as too dark or too foreign or too poor, but as simply Maria, worthy of respect and care. The next morning, she woke before dawn as usual and completed her chores with unusual energy. Rosa watched her suspiciously but said nothing. After breakfast was cleared and the kitchen cleaned, Maria asked permission to have the afternoon free. Free, Rosa repeated, her eyebrows rising. Since when do you need an afternoon free? I have been here nearly a month without a day off, Aunt Rosa, Maria said, keeping her voice respectful but firm. I work hard and I have done everything you have asked. I am only asking for a few hours. Rosa's eyes narrowed. This would not have anything to do with that cowboy, would it? The one who keeps looking at you like a mooncalf. Maria felt her face heat but held her ground. I am going for a walk. What I do on my free time is my concern. Not if it brings shame to this house, it is not, Rosa snapped. You think I do not know what people will say if they see you stepping out with a white man? You think that will not reflect poorly on me? I think, Maria said quietly, that people already talk about me because of my skin. They already think poorly of me. At least this way, I will have done something to deserve their gossip besides simply existing. Rosa looked like she wanted to argue further, but something in Maria's expression must have convinced her it would be futile. Be back by supper time, she said curtly. And if I hear one word of impropriety, you will find yourself on the next stage out of town, family or not. Yes, ma'am, Maria said, relief flooding through her. She changed into her best dress, a deep green cotton that her mother had made her before she died. It was simple but well-fitted, and when she looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror in her room, she thought maybe, just maybe, she looked pretty. James was waiting at the end of the street, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt that made his tanned skin look even darker. His face lit up when he saw her, and he immediately offered his arm. You look beautiful, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. Thank you, she murmured, taking his arm. You look very handsome yourself. They walked through town, and Maria was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. Some people looked merely curious, others openly disapproving. But James seemed oblivious to it all, or perhaps he simply did not care. He talked easily as they walked, telling her about his work at the Double R Ranch, about the horses he was training, about the vast Kansas prairie that he had come to love. It is different from anything I knew back east, he said, as they followed a path down toward the creek that ran south of town. It is wild and open and sometimes harsh, but there is a freedom in it, like the land is big enough for anyone who is brave enough to claim a place in it. I have never thought of it that way, Maria admitted. I have only thought of it as somewhere I do not quite belong. James stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. You belong anywhere you choose to be, Maria. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. They reached the creek, which was running low in the late summer heat, but still provided a pleasant spot shaded by cottonwood trees. James spread his jacket on the grass for Maria to sit on, and they settled by the water's edge. For a while, they simply enjoyed the quiet, the gentle burble of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. Tell me about your family, James said after a while. About your life before you came here. Maria found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told him about growing up in Santa Fe, about her father who had been a skilled carpenter and her mother who had taken in sewing. She told him about the little house with the garden full of peppers and tomatoes, about learning to make tortillas at her mother's side, about the feast days and celebrations of her childhood. It sounds wonderful, James said wistfully. It sounds like home. It was, Maria said, her voice catching. And then the fever came, and within 2 weeks they were both gone. I had nowhere to go except to my aunt, and she had made it clear in her letters that I was a charity case she was accepting out of obligation, not love. She is a fool, James said bluntly, a blind, foolish woman who cannot see the treasure right in front of her. You barely know me, Maria protested, but she was smiling despite herself. I know enough, James said. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I know that you are strong and kind and hardworking. I know that you have a beautiful smile that you do not share often enough. I know that when I am near you, I feel like I have finally found something worth staying in one place for. Maria's heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. James, I am frightened. This is all happening so fast, and I do not know what it means or where it could possibly go. We are from different worlds. No, James said firmly, squeezing her hand. We are both from the world of people who have lost things and are trying to build something new. We are both from the world of hard work and hope. That is the only world that matters. They sat by the creek for hours, talking about everything and nothing. James told her funny stories about horses he had trained and mishaps on cattle drives. Maria shared memories of her childhood, stories about her parents that made her laugh and cry in equal measure. As the afternoon wore on, Maria felt something inside her chest loosening, a knot of fear and loneliness that had been there so long she had forgotten what it was like to be without it. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when James finally said, reluctantly, "I suppose I should get you back before your aunt sends a search party." Maria nodded, though part of her wanted to stay here forever, in this peaceful place where the rest of the world seemed very far away. As they walked back toward town, James kept hold of her hand and Maria let him, no longer caring who might see. As they approached the boarding house, however, James stopped. "Before we go back, there is something I need to say." Maria looked up at him, her stomach fluttering with nerves. "What is it?" "I know this is fast," James said, his blue eyes intense and earnest. "I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I also know what I feel, and I am not a man who believes in wasting time or hiding the truth. I care about you, Maria, more than care about you. I think I am falling in love with you, and I wanted you to know that before anything else happens, before we go any further. I wanted you to know that this is not just a passing fancy or a momentary interest. This is real for me." Maria felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy mixed with lingering fear. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "But James, you must understand, people will not accept this. They will make our lives very difficult." "Then let them," James said fiercely. "I would rather have a difficult life with you than an easy life without you." "But Maria, I need to know that you believe that when I say I care about you, it has nothing to do with what you look like or where you come from, except that those things are part of who you are and I care about all of it. I need to know that you do not think I am just being kind out of pity." "I do not think that," Maria said, and she realized it was true. Whatever James felt for her, it was genuine. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, feel it in the way he held her hand like she was something precious. "I believe you." "Good," James said, and he smiled that beautiful, radiant smile. "Then we will figure the rest out together." They walked the last block to the boarding house, and James left her at the back gate with a promise to see her at supper. As Maria slipped inside, her heart full to bursting, she did not even care when Rosa gave her a sharp, suspicious look. Nothing could dampen the joy she felt. The hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found something rare and precious in this harsh prairie town. The weeks that followed were the happiest Maria had known since her parents died. James came to meals every day, and though they could not talk freely in front of the other boarders and Rosa's watchful eye, they found ways to steal moments together. A smile across the dining room. A brief touch of hands when Maria served his coffee. Whispered words as she cleared his plate. On Sundays, which Rosa grudgingly granted Maria off after that first week, they would walk out to the creek or ride in James's wagon to the open prairie beyond town. James was teaching Maria to ride horseback, patient and encouraging as she learned to handle Dakota, who had taken to Maria immediately. Those afternoons on the prairie, with the wind in her face and James beside her, were like a balm to Maria's soul. Out there, away from the judgment and prejudice of town, she could almost believe they were the only two people in the world. But of course, they were not. As September arrived and the heat finally began to break, Maria became increasingly aware of the talk that was circulating. She heard whispers when she walked through town on errands. She saw the way other women, particularly the respectable matrons of Abilene society, looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. The other boarders at Rosa's house had grown colder, some refusing to let Maria serve them, demanding that Rosa bring their food instead. Rosa herself had become downright hostile. "You are ruining my business," she hissed at Maria one evening after a particularly uncomfortable supper. "Half my boarders have threatened to leave if I keep employing you. They say it is indecent, you and that cowboy carrying on." "We are not carrying on," Maria said, trying to keep her voice level. "We are courting respectfully and properly." "Courting." Rosa's laugh was bitter and ugly. "A Mexican girl and a white cowboy, that is not courting, Maria. That is a path to heartbreak and shame." He will tire of you eventually, or his friends will talk sense into him and you will be left with nothing but a ruined reputation. You do not know him, Maria said fiercely. You do not know what is between us. I know the world, Rosa shot back, and the world does not allow for such things. You are too dark-skinned for a man like him. People will never accept it. Why can you not see that? The words hit Maria like physical blows, but she refused to let Rosa see how much they hurt. If the world cannot accept love between two good people, then the world is wrong. The world is what it is, Rosa said coldly. And dreamers who refuse to see reality are the ones who suffer most. Maria lay awake that night, Rosa's words echoing in her head, too dark-skinned. The phrase haunted her. She had heard variations of it all her life. From people in Santa Fe who thought she was too dark to be truly beautiful. From people here in Abilene who thought she was too dark to be truly American. She had tried not to let it matter, tried to find her worth in other things, but the words still cut deep. The next Sunday, she and James rode out to their usual spot by the creek. It was a beautiful early September day, the heat finally broken, the sky a brilliant, endless blue. They spread a blanket and shared the lunch Maria had packed, but James could tell something was wrong. You have been quiet all day, he said gently, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. What is troubling you? Maria tried to smile, but it felt false on her face. It is nothing. Just tired, I suppose, Maria. James took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. You can talk to me, whatever it is, I want to hear it. For a long moment, Maria was silent, staring at their joined hands. His skin was tanned from years of outdoor work, but still noticeably lighter than hers. The contrast had never bothered her before, but now, with Rosa's words fresh in her mind, she could not stop seeing it. They told me I am too dark-skinned, she said quietly, the words barely more than a whisper. My aunt said it. Others have said it too, though not always to my face. They say I am too dark for you, that we do not match, that people will never accept us because of how different we look. She waited for him to reassure her, to tell her again that it did not matter, to offer the platitudes she needed to hear. Instead, James was silent. When she finally worked up the courage to look at him, she found him studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, his eyes never leaving hers. Perfect, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are absolutely perfect. Maria felt tears spill down her cheeks. James, you do not understand, they say. I do not care what they say. He kissed her hand again, then her wrist, then the inside of her arm, each kiss soft and reverent. Let me tell you what I see, Maria. I see skin the color of the earth after rain, rich and beautiful and vital. I see eyes that hold the warmth of every fire that has ever burned against the desert night. I see a face that was created by generations of strength and survival and beauty. I see perfection, Maria. I see you exactly as you are, and you are perfect to me. But we are so different, Maria sobbed, unable to hold back the tears any longer. People will always see that first. They will always judge us, always make things difficult. Then let them, James said fiercely. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Maria, listen to me. I have spent my whole life watching people be judged and dismissed because of things they cannot control. I watched my mother cry over the cruelty she faced. I watched my father fight men who disrespected her. And I learned from them that the only thing that matters, the only thing worth anything in this world, is love and respect and standing by the people who matter to you. He leaned forward until their foreheads touched, his voice dropping to a whisper. You matter to me. More than anything or anyone has ever mattered. And I do not give a damn if the entire town of Abilene disapproves. I do not care if every respectable person in Kansas thinks we are wrong. You are not too dark or too foreign or too anything. You are exactly, precisely, perfectly what I want and need in love. Love, Maria's voice broke on the word. Yes, love, James said. I love you, Maria Delgado. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love the way you care for stray cats and the way you smile when you think no one is watching. I love your voice and your hands, and yes, I love your beautiful skin, every shade and tone of it. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you are perfect just as you are." Maria was crying in earnest now, but they were tears of release, of joy, of a burden she had carried for so long finally being lifted. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love you so much it frightens me." James kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. It was Maria's first kiss, and it felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers again. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not want to waste another day without you. Marry me, Maria. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are perfect and loved and valued." "Yes," Maria said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, yes, yes." They held each other as the sun moved across the sky, making plans and promises. James told her about a piece of land he had been saving to purchase. 100 acres about 10 miles from town with a creek running through it, and good grazing for cattle and horses. He had nearly enough money saved, he said, and with both of them working, they could build a house, start a small ranch, create a life together. "It will not be easy," he warned her. "We will have to work hard, and we will face criticism and possibly worse. But Maria, I promise you, I will never let anyone make you feel less than you are. I will stand beside you always." "I know you will," Maria said, and she meant it. "And I will stand beside you too." When they returned to town that evening, they went directly to Rosa's boarding house. Rosa took one look at their joined hands and Maria's radiant face and knew immediately what had happened. "You are a fool," she said to Maria, her voice cold. "Both of you are fools. This will only end in heartbreak." "With respect, ma'am," James said, his voice polite but firm, "the only heartbreak I see is the kind that comes from living a small, fearful life. Maria and I are choosing differently. We are choosing love and courage, and we hope that you can find it in your heart to support us, or at least not stand in our way." "Support you?" Rosa's face flushed with anger. "You want me to support you bringing shame to this family, to this house? People will say I encouraged this, that I pushed my dark-skinned niece at a white man for advancement." "Then people will be wrong," Maria said, finding her voice and her courage. "No one pushed us together, Aunt Rosa. We found each other despite everything working against us. And I am going to marry James whether you approve or not, but I would prefer to have your blessing. You are my only family." Rosa stared at her for a long moment, and Maria thought she saw something soften in her aunt's eyes. But then the older woman's face hardened again. "You will not marry from this house. I will not have people thinking I condone this madness. If you insist on going through with this foolishness, you will have to find somewhere else to stay until the wedding." The words stung, but Maria lifted her chin. "Very well, I will collect my things." "No," James said firmly. "Maria will stay at the hotel in town, and I will pay for her room until we are married. It will all be proper and respectable, and no one will have cause to speak against her character." "Her character?" Rosa laughed bitterly. "Her character is already being questioned, Mr. Crawford. This changes nothing." "It changes everything," James said. He looked at Maria. "Go pack your belongings, I will wait here." Moving through the boarding house one last time, gathering the few possessions she had brought from Santa Fe, Maria felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. This place had never been a home, not really, but it had been shelter, and leaving it felt like burning a bridge. Still, as she carried her carpet bag down the stairs and saw James waiting for her with that steady, loving expression on his face, she knew she was making the right choice. They walked to the Grand Hotel, the finest establishment in Abilene, and James paid for a room for Maria without flinching at the cost. The clerk behind the desk raised his eyebrows but said nothing, taking James's money and handing over a key. "I will be right across the hall," James said as he carried her bag up the stairs. "Nothing improper but close enough that I will hear if you need anything. We will arrange the wedding as quickly as possible." "How quickly is possible?" Maria asked, suddenly nervous. She had always imagined getting married in a church, with family around her, with her mother helping her prepare. This was all happening so differently than she had dreamed. "I will talk to the minister tomorrow," James said. "But Maria, if you want to wait, if you want a big ceremony or more time, we can do that. I do not want you to feel rushed." "No," Maria said, surprising herself with her certainty. "No, I do not want to wait. I want to start our life together. I want to leave this town and all its judgment behind and build something new." James smiled and kissed her forehead. "Then that is exactly what we will do." The next few days passed in a blur. James did speak to the minister, a kindly older man named Reverend Thompson, who agreed to perform the ceremony despite some clear reservations about the match. Maria used some of her saved wages to purchase fabric and spent her days sewing a wedding dress, a simple white cotton gown with lace at the collar that her mother would have been proud of. The hardest part was facing the townspeople. News of the upcoming wedding spread like wildfire, and Maria could not go anywhere without feeling eyes on her, without hearing whispers and seeing judgment. Some people were merely curious, but others were openly hostile. One afternoon, as Maria was walking back from the general store, a woman actually spat at her feet and called her a disgrace. James, when he heard about it, was furious. He wanted to confront the woman, but Maria stopped him. "It will only make things worse," she said, though her own anger burned hot and fierce. "Let them say what they will. Soon we will be gone from here and their opinions will not matter." "Their opinions do not matter now," James said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. They were standing in the hotel hallway, propriety be damned. "You are worth 1,000 of them, Maria, never forget that." The wedding took place on a Thursday afternoon in late September. The church was nearly empty, with only a handful of witnesses. James had invited some men from the Double R Ranch, and to Maria's surprise, a few of them came, standing awkwardly in the back pews, but there nonetheless. Rosa did not attend, though Maria had sent her a handwritten invitation. The absence hurt more than Maria wanted to admit. But when Maria walked down the aisle in her homemade dress, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers that James had picked for her that morning, and saw him waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes, nothing else mattered. He looked so handsome in his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. When she reached him, he took her hand and whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony with dignity and grace, and if he had doubts about the match, he kept them to himself. When the moment came to exchange vows, James's voice was strong and sure. "I, James Crawford, take you, Maria Delgado, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, respect you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to remind you every day that you are perfect and loved, and I promise to build a life with you that is worthy of the courage you have shown. This I swear, before God and these witnesses." Maria's voice shook with emotion as she repeated her own vows, promising to love and honor James, to build a home with him, to face whatever challenges came with courage and faith. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and told James he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was sweet and full of promise, a seal on vows that both of them meant with every fiber of their being. There was a small supper afterward at the hotel, paid for by James and attended by the ranch hands who had come to the wedding. It was not the grand celebration Maria might have once imagined, but it was real and full of genuine warmth. The men were rough around the edges, but they treated Maria with respect and offered sincere congratulations. One of them, an older cowboy named Charlie, pulled James aside at one point. "You are a good man, James Crawford," Maria heard him say, "and that is a fine woman you married. Do not let anyone tell you different." "I will not," James promised. That night, in the hotel room that was now theirs as husband and wife, James and Maria came together with tenderness and love. James was patient and gentle, understanding that Maria was nervous, and he took his time showing her that she was cherished and desired. Afterward, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Maria felt a peace she had never known. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They left Abilene 2 days later, James having given his notice at the Double R Ranch and collected his wages. They purchased a wagon and supplies with their combined savings and set out for the land James had been eyeing, following the creek south into the open prairie. The land was exactly as James had described, a beautiful stretch of rolling grassland with the creek running through it, cottonwood trees providing shade, and a small rise that would be perfect for building a house. "It is ours," James said, wrapping his arms around Maria from behind as they stood looking at their new home. 100 acres of our very own land. We can build whatever life we want here, Maria." "It is perfect," Maria said, leaning back against him. And it was. Not because the land was particularly special or because the location was ideal, but because it was theirs, a place where they could start fresh, where they could create their own world. The first months were hard work. They lived in the wagon while they built a small cabin, working from dawn until dusk cutting logs, raising walls, building a roof. Maria learned skills she had never imagined needing: how to handle an axe and a hammer, how to mix mud for chinking between logs, how to build a fireplace that would heat their home through the coming winter. James proved to be everything Maria could have hoped for in a husband. He was hardworking and patient, never condescending even when showing her how to do things she did not know. He made her laugh with stories and silly jokes, and he held her close at night, whispering words of love and encouragement when she was tired and discouraged. They got their first visit from neighbors in November, just as they were finishing the cabin. A family named the Johnsons, who owned the land to the west, came riding up one afternoon with a basket of preserves and fresh bread. "Wanted to welcome you to the area, Mrs. Johnson said, a sturdy woman in her 40s with kind eyes. "Heard you were building out here and thought you might appreciate some supplies." Maria had tensed, waiting for the judgment, the whispered comments about her skin or her marriage. But Mrs. Johnson simply smiled at her warmly and complimented the work they had done on the cabin. "You have got yourself a hard worker here, Mr. Crawford," she said to James. "Not every woman could help build a house like this." "I am well aware of how fortunate I am," James said, smiling at Maria with such love that she felt her cheeks warm. The Johnsons became their first real friends in the area, checking in on them regularly and sharing advice about ranching in this part of Kansas. Through them, Maria and James met other neighbors, and while not everyone was accepting, enough people were kind that Maria began to feel like maybe, just maybe, they could build a real community here. Winter came, cold and harsh, but the cabin held strong against the wind and snow. Maria learned to cook on the fireplace, to card wool and spin it into yarn, to preserve food and manage their small but growing household. James worked on breaking horses and building up a small herd of cattle, purchasing stock with the last of their savings and working contracts with larger ranches to train their horses. It was hard work and sometimes lonely, but Maria had never been happier. Each morning she woke up beside the man she loved. Each day, she worked on building a life that was hers. Each night, she fell asleep feeling safe and valued and loved. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Maria discovered she was pregnant in April, and James's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Maria, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Maria asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy?" James set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Maria, I am beyond happy. I am grateful and excited and absolutely terrified, but mostly I am just in awe of you. We created this life together, this baby who will be part you and part me and entirely ours. How could I be anything but happy? The pregnancy was not easy. Maria was sick for the first few months, and as summer arrived, the heat made everything harder. But James was attentive and careful, taking over more of the heavy work and making sure Maria rested. Mrs. Johnson came by regularly with advice and supplies, sharing wisdom from her own experiences with childbirth and motherhood. "You are going to be just fine," she told Maria one afternoon as they sat shelling peas on the cabin porch. "You are one of the strongest women I have ever met, and that baby is lucky to have you as a mother." The words meant more to Maria than Mrs. Johnson probably realized. She had worried during the long prairie nights about what kind of mother she would be, about what kind of life her child would have. Would they face the same prejudice she had? Would they be accepted in this community, or would they always be outsiders? "What if people treat our baby the way they treated me?" Maria asked James one night, her hand resting on her growing belly. "What if they are cruel?" "Then we will teach our child what my parents taught me," James said firmly. "That the cruelty of others says everything about them and nothing about us. That love and respect and decency are what matter. That we stand up for what is right, even when it is hard. And most importantly, that they are loved and perfect exactly as they are." Their son was born on a cold November night in 1873, after a long and difficult labor. Mrs. Johnson served as midwife, and when she finally placed the screaming, red-faced baby in Maria's arms, Maria felt a love so overwhelming that it took her breath away. "He is perfect," James whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. "Maria, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after James's father, with the middle name Diego after Maria's father. He was a beautiful baby with a shock of dark hair and skin that was a blend of both parents, neither too light nor too dark, but somewhere beautifully in between. As Maria nursed him for the first time, she felt a fierce, protective love unlike anything she had ever experienced. "No one will ever make you feel less than you are," she whispered to her son. "Your father and I will make sure of that." The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara Rose, and then another son, Samuel, 2 years after that. The small cabin James and Maria had built was expanded into a proper house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a large kitchen where Maria could cook and bake. The ranch prospered as well. James's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the region, and they were able to expand their cattle herd and purchase more land. Maria ran the household and managed their small vegetable garden, which had grown into a substantial operation that supplied not only their family but neighbors as well. She sold preserves and vegetables at the market in Abilene, and though she still faced occasional rudeness more often than not, people treated her with the respect she had earned. Rosa had written once, a brief letter that arrived 3 years after Maria's wedding. It was stiff and formal, but it was an olive branch of sorts. She acknowledged that Maria's marriage seemed to be succeeding and expressed a tentative interest in meeting her great-niece and great-nephew. Maria had written back, and while their relationship would never be warm, they maintained a cordial correspondence. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Maria with a trip to Abilene to have their photograph taken, a new family portrait to hang in their home. As they dressed in their finest clothes and gathered the children, now 7, 5, and 3 years old, Maria thought about how far they had come from that dusty day in 1872, when she had first stepped off the stagecoach, alone and afraid. "What are you thinking about?" James asked as they sat for the photograph, Maria holding baby Samuel while James stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder, Thomas and Clara standing proudly beside them. "I am thinking about how different my life is from what I feared it would be," Maria said softly. "I am thinking about how you changed everything." "We changed everything," James corrected gently. "You were brave enough to take a chance on me, on us. You did that, Maria. You made this life happen." The photograph, when it was developed, showed a family. Not a perfect family by society's standards, perhaps, but a real one. A family built on love and respect and courage. Maria's dark skin and James's light skin, their children's beautiful blend of both, their obvious love for each other captured forever in sepia tones. As the years continued to pass, Maria and James's ranch became a gathering place for people who did not quite fit the mold of proper society. Mixed families, immigrant families, anyone who had faced prejudice or hardship found a welcome at the Crawford Ranch. Maria, remembering her own experiences, made sure that everyone who came to their door was treated with dignity and respect. Their children grew up strong and confident, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. Thomas inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's work ethic. Clara had her mother's beauty and her father's fearless spirit. Little Samuel was quiet and thoughtful, content to spend hours reading books that James purchased on trips to larger towns. On a warm evening in September 1887, 15 years after Maria had first arrived in Abilene, James and Maria sat on the porch of their now substantial ranch house, watching the sun set over the prairie. Their children were grown or nearly so. Thomas was helping to run the ranch, Clara was courting a young man from a neighboring farm, and Samuel was talking about becoming a teacher. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked, taking Maria's hand in his. "Do you ever wish we had done things differently?" Maria looked at him, at the man who had seen her when everyone else looked through her, who had loved her when love seemed impossible, who had stood beside her through 15 years of hard work and joy and challenge. His hair was streaked with gray now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as he had been that first day by the creek. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for one single moment. You gave me everything I never dared to dream of, James. You gave me a home and a family and a life full of love. How could I ever regret that?" "I am the one who should be grateful," James said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it, just as he had all those years ago. "You taught me what real courage looks like. You taught me that love is stronger than prejudice, that family is what we build, not what we are given. You made me a better man, Maria." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, their hands intertwined, their hearts still beating as one. The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees, carrying the scent of late summer grass and the distant sounds of cattle lowing. Somewhere inside, they could hear Clara laughing at something Samuel had said, and Thomas calling out that supper was nearly ready. "Perfect," James said softly, and Maria knew he was not just talking about the evening but about their life, their family, everything they had built together. "Yes," Maria agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Perfect." And it was. Not because their life had been easy or free from struggle, not because society had fully accepted them, or because prejudice had magically disappeared. It was perfect because they had faced everything together, because they had built something real and lasting out of love and courage and stubborn determination. It was perfect because after all the pain and fear and loneliness of her early life, Maria had found a place where she belonged, a person who saw her not as too dark or too foreign or too anything, but simply as herself, worthy of love and respect and happiness. As the years continued to roll by, Maria and James watched their children grow into adults who carried forward the values they had been taught. Thomas married a kind woman from town and brought her home to the ranch, expanding the operation and eventually taking over much of the daily management as James grew older. Clara married her young man and moved to his family's farm, but she visited often, bringing her own children to learn about their heritage from both grandparents. Samuel did become a teacher, opening a small school in the nearby growing town, and making sure that every child, regardless of their background or the color of their skin, received a quality education. Maria and James became grandparents many times over, and they delighted in each new baby, each new addition to the family they had started with nothing but love and hope. They watched their grandchildren grow up in a world that, while still far from perfect, was slowly changing. Laws were passed, attitudes shifted, and while prejudice certainly still existed, it was not as openly accepted as it had been in those early days. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, James stood up to make a toast. His hair was fully gray now, his body bearing the marks of a lifetime of hard work, but his eyes were still that same brilliant blue. And when he looked at Maria, they still held all the love they had on that first day by the creek. 30 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, I met a woman who changed my life completely. I met someone who taught me what real strength looks like, what true beauty means, what love can accomplish when two people are brave enough to fight for it. Maria, you have been my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Every day with you has been a gift, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Here is to 30 more years, if the good Lord is willing, and to a love that has proven stronger than anything the world could throw at it. Maria stood and joined him, tears streaming down her face. You told me I was perfect, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. When I felt broken and unwanted, when I thought I would never be enough, you told me I was perfect, and you spent the rest of our life proving it. Thank you, James Crawford, for seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and that is saying something. They kissed, and their family erupted in cheers and applause. Later that evening, as Maria and James sat together watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Maria thought about that scared 19-year-old girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in Abilene so many years ago. She thought about Rosa's cruel words and the judgment of strangers, about all the times she had been told she was not enough, that her skin was too dark, that she would never truly belong. And then she looked at the life she had built, at the family surrounding her, at the man beside her who still held her hand like she was something precious. She had been enough. She had always been enough. It had just taken finding the right person, someone who could see past the superficial judgments of society to the woman underneath, for her to realize it. What are you thinking about? James asked, as he had so many times over the years. I am thinking that I was wrong, Maria said. All those years ago, when people told me I was too dark-skinned, I believed them on some level. I thought maybe they were right, that maybe I was not quite good enough, but I was not too dark. I was never too anything. I was exactly who I was supposed to be, and it just took you to help me see it. James squeezed her hand. You were always perfect, Maria. I just wish I could have helped you see it sooner. You helped me see it when I needed to, Maria said. That is all that matters. The sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Maria leaned against James, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her, listening to the sounds of their family and thinking about how a single moment of courage, a single act of love, had changed the entire trajectory of her life. She had been brave enough to accept love when it was offered. James had been brave enough to offer it despite the obstacles they would face. Together, they had been brave enough to build a life that mattered, to raise children who understood the value of love and respect, to create a legacy that would outlast them both. As darkness fell and the stars came out, bright and clear in the vast prairie sky, Maria and James remained on the porch, hands joined, hearts beating together as they had for 30 years. They had faced prejudice and hardship, struggle and loss, but they had also known deep joy and profound love. They had built something real and lasting, something that no amount of judgment or hatred could diminish. Perfect, James whispered one more time, and Maria smiled because she finally, truly believed him. Their love was perfect. Their life was perfect. Not because it was easy or conventional or approved of by everyone, but because it was theirs, built with their own hands and hearts, and that made all the difference. And so they remained as the prairie night settled around them. Two people who had dared to love across the boundaries society tried to impose, who had proven that courage and commitment could overcome prejudice, who had created a beautiful, imperfect, utterly perfect life together. The stars wheeled overhead, The wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. It was a wild, free sound, and it seemed to Maria like a blessing, like the land itself was celebrating their love and their life and their enduring, unshakable devotion to each other.